We're going to open the floor for a couple of questions. I know we're running a touch behind, but hopefully we'll get a couple of questions to ask. While we're collecting, I might just ask a quick question of my own. But you talked about the great negotiations and the negotiations you've done in the past. How do you feel you're going with the Australian people in the negotiation leading up to the next election?
Good. I mean, the reality is there have been an election held on most Saturdays since the last election. Labor probably would have won, but of course, this is why you shouldn't over-rely on polls like my colleague does. It'll be decided on election day, but the reason why I'm positive about our message with the Australian people, so I think the most important things to Australians are their family and their health. If your family's okay, if your health's all right and the health of your loved ones, then you can pretty much get up in the morning and deal with most other issues. That's why I want to lift living standards for people. I don't have a view that one group of Australians is more important than any other group of Australians. But I do think the function of government is to enable people to get a fair go. And for me, a fair go has a very practical meaning. Some of you might have kids who are teenagers. You want them to be able to do an apprenticeship if that's what they're interested in. You want them to be able to go to university if they work hard. Some of you might have parents in their 80s and 90s, perhaps someone who's being diagnosed with a dementia. That is so challenging, so time-consuming. I want to make sure you're getting the support for that. Well, this country, politics isn't that complicated. Treat other people the way you'd like to be treated yourself. It's not a bad strategy, is it?
Thanks, Bill. We have a question on table 11, and please state your name and the organisation, and if we can keep it brief, that would be great.
Thanks, Damien. Mr Shorten, Mary Delahunty from Hester. Today we understand that the Minister Josh Frydenberg is meeting with some of his backbench colleagues about an energy policy to convince them to come on board with what we believe to be perhaps the best chance to move this forward and take the politics out of it. Do you have any comments on how this might be tracking through the Parliament?
We want to win the climate change wars. I cannot believe 10 years on we're still arguing about policies which really should have been in place a decade ago. The single greatest driver for rising energy prices in Australia is lack of coherent national policy. The government has got to get over its own civil war on energy. But what we also say to the government is we will not be unreasonable. But we don't buy the argument that placating the right-wing knuckle-draggers of the Liberal Party qualifies as ending the climate change wars. Surrender is not victory. Surrender to the people who think that we can stay as we are doesn't help us in the future. So yeah, we can work with the government, and I hope that if we're in government, the opposition then will realise once and for all, stop fighting on climate change. Let's get energy prices down. Let's get more jobs in renewable energy. Let's also not hand on a worse environment to our kids than the one we've inherited.
Have we got any more questions from the floor? I might just take the opportunity again. Bill, what do you think is the future of Australia in the next 10 years? So how should we be thinking around the things that are most likely to happen on a longer term basis, not just the next election?
There are things that we can influence and the things that we can't. Spending, trying to hope that the things we can't influence will come good would be a mistake, but there are things we can influence. We can influence how educated we are as a nation. I think parents are universally linked by a common DNA that you want to make sure your kids get a good quality education. It's what I want for my kids. The point about that is that you've got to properly fund your schools. You've got to properly fund universities, you've got to properly fund TAFE, you've got to properly fund the early years, preschool. You can't do education on the cheap. There is a debate which says more money doesn't solve a problem. The people who generally say that don't have to worry about money. The reality is that the best single investment we can make in our productive future is investing in education. Full stop. Full stop. Now, I do honestly believe that the government sees education, like health, as issues to be shut down. They want to talk about the issues they think they're strong on and not talk about anything else. We don't take that view. We take the view, let's just work out what the future should be. So, education, big lever, which we can influence. I think the other thing is that we can't just keep making these massive tax scale change promises the government's making without analysing where's the money coming from. I haven't heard a satisfactory answer from the government that getting the Parliament to vote on $144 billion of changes in tax scales and another $80 billion on corporate tax changes, where is that money going to come from? So I think we've got to keep an eye on national debt. No ifs, buts or maybes about that. I think the other challenge is how do we get our workplaces more productive? And that does involve looking at the wages system, looking at its interaction also with infrastructure. When you look at it, we've got two big levers we can pull: infrastructure, investment in infrastructure and investment in people. I had to also say to round off these 4 points of infrastructure, our workplace system, which can help improve living standards and productivity and wages and also education. Round it off with our health system. We need to properly fund our health system. Money spent on prevention, much better than primary care. Money spent on primary care helps save, the secondary care in the hospital system. Money spent on our hospital system and our aged care system. There are people sitting in hospital beds, older Australians, because there's no aged care for them. And the cost is enormous, and also the effect it has on the actual human beings involved, enormous. So I think that when you join it all up in the future, it's education, it's infrastructure, it's healthcare, and it's prioritising the living standards of people at work. You do that through the IR system, through a tax refund system, which is fair income, and tackling the cost of living drivers in healthcare and energy. There you go.
Thank you. We might wind it up. There's no other questions. I can't see any other questions from the floor. So I would like to welcome to the stage Megan Moto, who's the CEO of Consult Australia. But as Megan's heading up, I did want to say, Bill, the gender pay gap is a huge issue, and it's one that First State Super, we have 70% of our members are women, and it's an issue that doesn't want to go away.
Let me just take that point in finishing on the gender pay gap. Here's a challenge for all of us. If we did nothing else in the next 15 years, if we could just see women treated equally to men in every aspect of life in Australia, we would be the richest country in the world. I believe that, and we've just got to work out how we achieve that.
Thanks so much, and it's my pleasure today to warmly thank Bill for your speech this morning. It's been a really wide-ranging speech touching on the key issues of health, education, taxation and importantly the pay gap. I've got a 7-year-old daughter, it's going on 17 of course, as daughters of that age generally are, and I similarly hope that her future is one where she can see equality and not wait for the next generation after her to do that. So thank you so much for those warm remarks, and thank you in particular for acknowledging the work of CEDA with our report yesterday. The challenge of inequity, and you spoke about inclusive prosperity, the challenge of inequity is one that we must all be really thinking very seriously about, not just to challenge the underpinning reasons for that inequity, and you have done so in your speech and talked about the competition of ideas that you bring to the table as a big target opposition, and I thank you for that, those bold ideas, because we need them in this country. But also one where we need to address how we support bringing all Australians together to tackle these problems together as a nation and have us all rowing in the same direction so that we can tackle this issue of inequality in our country. So thank you for your acknowledgement of CEDA's work, and thank you for coming out on this chilly winter Canberra morning to speak to us. Thank you very much. Please join with me in thanking the Honourable Bill Shorten for his speech, and also to Graham. Thank you.